My name is Sheila Becker from ILR. This is the session around NIS2. The idea of today's session is mostly to do a demystification of the changes coming with NIS2, especially if you are already under NIS1. There won't be so many changes compared to the obligations under ILR under the NIS1, but we will go through them, of course. So today's agenda will be, of course, we talk about NIS2 and the changes, but we also will talk about ILR's approach, about the specific changes that's coming with NIS2 compared to NIS1, an approximative timeline, but keep in mind that this session was already done in the beginning of the year and even last year, so I did not update anything, so the timeline might not be as accurate anymore. But we will go through it so that you have the exact same information as the participants in the previous sessions. And we will talk also about the collaboration and support by ILR. So there's still time joining Mentimeter. So for the changes that NIS2 is bringing, the idea behind NIS1 as well as NIS2 is to have a high-level cybersecurity across the whole European Union. So it's really to have that every system that is important for the society, that it has a good level of resiliency and a good level of cybersecurity to protect the services as well as the data of customers. The NIS2 is not like a single shot, but it is part of the bigger picture from the European cybersecurity strategy. So where we have the Cybersecurity Act, which gives actually a mandate to the European Agency for the Cybersecurity, ENISA, and it also produces the first cybersecurity certification framework. But also Cyber Resilience Act, which is still in the phase of negotiations, which will define the requirements for digital products, and the Cyber Solidarity Act, which will have like a European cyber security shield, and of course then the NIS2. When we talk about NIS2, we have to graduate the talks or the parts into different topics. So we have the scope, which is a very important change between NIS1 and NIS2. We have the governance of the C-level. We will talk about security measures, the incident notification procedure, near-miss notification, information exchange, and also the supervision mechanisms by the authorities. So the scope of NIS2. Under NIS1, we already had the sectors energy, drinking water, health, transport, digital infrastructure without telecom. And financial sectors, but financial sector is not in the scope of ILR, that's under CSSF, so we will not focus on those sectors. But with NIS2, there will be new sectors coming into the scope, so there will be telecom will be included into the scope of the digital infrastructure. There will be trust service providers, also wastewater, managed service providers, postal services, food production and manufacturing, and also public administration. A big change between NIS1 and NIS2 is actually the classification scheme. So under NIS1, the competent authority needed to identify essential entities that were considered as being essential for the country, for their society and for the economical well-being of the country. Well, as the approach and the identification of the different entities was so divergent in the different EU member states, the Commission introduced a size cap. So entities that fall under the size cap, that are either a large entity or medium entity, are by default in the scope of NIS2. So there will not be an identification by the authority for those entities, but it is the other way around. So those entities that meet the criteria for large entities, meaning that they have at least 250 employees or a 50 million euros turnover worldwide. Same goes for medium entities when they have at least 50 employees or 10 million euros turnover worldwide. Plus, from this default classification scheme, there is still the possibility for member states to identify other entities that are not classifying via this mechanism because they might have a high risk profile or they are a sole provider of a service. And to give you an idea of the different sectors and the classification of essential or important, you can actually see that for most of the sectors, large entities in Annex 1, large entities are considered essential and medium entities are considered important, while small and micro entities are not in the scope by default. But there are some exceptions. So you can see, like for public administration as well as for digital infrastructures, especially providers of public electronic communication networks, TLD, name registries, DNS service providers, and qualified trust service providers, they are all essential actually. For Annex 2, all the entities that are large or medium are considered important, and the small and micro are by default not in scope. But as said, we will still be able to identify an entity if it is a sole provider or has a high risk profile. One thing, I also mentioned that for the size cap, I said like the annual turnover worldwide. And the reason why I mention it is because the size cap is defined based on the Commission recommendation of the 6th of May. And here it is important to know that it is actually, you can have the guide. And I really recommend to go check up for the guide because it's very important when you are part of a group, because it's actually the group that is considered. So it's not only at the entity itself, but it's really the group level that is considered for calculating the size. And the guide will also help you in identifying which entities are actually considered as a partner or linked entity, or maybe in case you have an autonom, if you are an autonomous entity. The supervision mechanisms, there's, as I mentioned before, so we have essential and important entities. And the difference between the two entities is actually that the one is more supervised than the other. So essential entities need to provide already beforehand, so in a prevention way, which will be for ILR every year. So every essential entity needs to provide on a yearly basis the security measures to ILR. While important entities still need to apply security measures, but they are not required to send it to ILR beforehand in a yearly manner. However, there is also the obligation of instant notification. Once an incident happens, the essential and the important entity needs to notify the ILR of the incident, and after the incident, ILR has the right to actually ask about the security measures that are in place in order to verify that those are actually taken. So this is what it means. Ex ante means before something happening, and ex post is after something happened. So before something happened is really the essential entity that needs to provide on a yearly basis the security measures to ILR, and ex post, after the incident, every entity, whether it's essential or important entity, need to notify ILR and give information if requested to ILR. I said that already, so the classification scheme really depending on the sector and on the group size of the entity. And in general, it is for large and medium-sized entities, they are essential or important entities, depending on the annex. If you are falling by default under those classification schemes, you are obliged to do the self-registration process. You will not get identified by ILR, but you are in the responsibility to do the self-registration. Not registering yourself will not make it that you are not falling in the scope. You can do so already via the website at ILR for the NIS team and the NIS2 directive website. So the governance and the security measures that are changing with NIS2. The big change is that cybersecurity with NIS2 needs to be considered as a top management priority. There are very specific cybersecurity risk management measures, way more specific than with NIS1. And also a big change is that you have to take supply chain cybersecurity as one of the measures. So what does it mean, the management bodies? They have to approve the cybersecurity measures. So, and in order to be able to approve those measures, the management body needs also to follow training in cybersecurity, because they need to understand the impact. They need to understand where they allocate the resources and what it means. So that's why they need to understand what maybe a ransomware can have an impact to, and that it means that maybe the company is out of business for a couple of weeks. So they need to understand that in order to be able to allocate enough resources in order to prevent one or the other attack, or have resiliency in place, have a backup mechanism and everything, so that they really can understand that the decisions they are taking on resources will impact their cybersecurity measures. Plus, they also have to offer the similar training to all kind of employees. So not only on IT employees, but really also secretariat, everyone actually that is working at the company. NIS2 defines quite a set of policies that need to be in place. So you have to have a policy for risk analysis and information security. You have to have a policy for incident handling, so that you know, okay, I have an incident, what do I need to do next? How can I have my business continuity, a backup management, disaster recovery, and crisis management? So really, how do I react when I'm in a bad situation? How can I do the backup? How can I recover? And how gonna I deal with the crisis management? Then security and procurement. Therefore, we need to have a vulnerability handling and disclosure mechanism, and the training and hygiene. So the training is all kind of trainings. It's not only for all personnel, but it also can mean that you have a policy in place that your IT or your cyber personnel has to have freshen up training every 2 years. So that's really a policy depending on your company. And the hygiene part would be that every employee needs to have training over every 2 years or something like that. And also you have to have policies for human resources and access control, so that you actually know that if someone is leaving the company, that you are removing the access, for instance, to servers or to data centers or similar. Do not hesitate to text questions in the Mentimeter. When it comes to supply chain cybersecurity, there you actually, the company needs to consider the cybersecurity risks from the suppliers. So they actually need to be aware that the supplier can also have cybersecurity issues, and what happens if I am not able to get my service or my supply in time. And therefore I need to assess actually the overall quality of the cybersecurity practices by the suppliers or the service provider. So we talked about the security measures, but now we're also going to talk about the incident and information exchange. As NIS1 defined that incident need to be notified within or as soon as possible, but they did not define a time frame, and that meant that actually over the European Union it was not quite harmonized, and that's why they came up with a harmonized approach. So everywhere in the European Union, they have to apply this formal way of incident notification time frame. So within 24 hours after detecting the incident, you need to provide to ILR an early warning. After 72 hours of detecting the incident, you need to do the official incident notification. The final report should be done within a month, but depending on the attack, there can be actually, or the incident, there can be actually a reason to extend the final report towards 2 months, and thus the final report will be replaced by an intermediate status report. However, we can always also request an intermediate status report between the 72 hours and the final report. NIS2 is working also towards more information sharing, because it is seen that obviously cybersecurity benefits definitely from information sharing, and therefore entities can exchange information on cyber threats, near misses, and vulnerabilities within sectors and among sectors. So for this, the NIS2 gives the framework in order to create communities of essential and important entities. And member states shall help for that establishment of those arrangements, and entities that are taking part of such communities should notify the competent authority that they are participating in such arrangements. And the idea behind it is that if an entity is not yet part of an arrangement, that actually the competent authority could show them towards an arrangement or towards a community which would be suited for them as a sector. And of course, there's always the opportunity to also notify on a voluntary basis to the competent authority any relevant information, whether you are essentially important or nothing at all under NIS2, then you still can notify ILR on a voluntary basis from incidents, threats, and near misses. There's also things that are good to know. So CSIRT's tasks have been elaborated. They are more clear and they will be more helpful from NIS2 than previously. There is a coordinated vulnerability disclosure scheme inside of NIS2. And when you are part of either domain name service or managed service provider, TLD, cloud data center, then you might already have heard about the implementing acts that are going to be prepared by the European Commission. In July, I believe there was a public consultation on it, and they should be done by the 17th of October with the implementing act. The implementing act will be mandatory to all the entities that are falling under the European jurisdiction, like DNS, MSP, TLT, cloud, data centers, CDN, not for the others. So if you are in the energy sector, health, or public administration, the implementing act will not be binding to you, to your sector. There will be peer reviews, and they're between the countries. So how the NIS2 is implemented, the mechanisms in place will be compared and checked. And there's also mutual assistance between the different countries that is set up with NIS2. The supervision mechanism, which is also very important because it's changing also with NIS2. A competent authority can do audits, inspections, can always request information. And if we see that something's not working out quite well, we can actually give binding instructions, issue warnings, and even order entities to inform their customers if there has been a cyber incident or a cyber threat. And if the enforcement is ineffective, we can even go as far as to suspend temporarily certification or authorization of a relevant service. So it will not be ILR, but we can ask an authority to suspend the authorization of the relevant services. And in a worst case, we can also do sanctions. But one important note, a sanction is not due to an incident. If you have an incident, it does not mean that you're going to get a sanction. If you do not notify an incident, though, then you can have a sanction. If you do not notify your security measures, you can have a sanction. But not because you are simply having an incident means that you're going to have a sanction. So it's always better, if you are not sure whether you need to notify an incident, do not hesitate and ask, or just notify the incident, and we can still see afterwards whether it was needed or whether it is a significant incident. And the administrative sanctions were also not harmonized on a European level. So that's why NIS2 gets way more specific here. So essential entities can face a fine of 10 million euros or 2% of their global annual turnover, whichever of the two is higher. And for important entities, a fine can be up to 7 million or 1.4% of the global annual turnover, whichever of the two is higher. So now we are coming a bit talking about ILR's approach. And if you knew ILR, you might already know that ILR's approach is always to have a collaborative approach. What does that mean? So when we first set up actually our framework, or our the first operators that were under the security obligations by ILR were actually the telecom operators, and there we decided that we want to help them, and we also want to give feedback. So by that, we were creating working groups in order to create risk assessment framework with the operators, because the operators are experts in their part and in their networks and in their assets. So we cannot really tell them, oh, you have to evaluate a certain asset in a certain way, when we do not know how it is implemented in their own networks. So that's why we approach better in a way of collaborative approach than to have a coercive approach. We want to work together in order to reach a higher level of cybersecurity. And that means that we are actually with CERIMA, which is a security risk management tool. We are developing different modules. The risk assessment module is based on Monarch. And the whole idea behind CERIMA is actually that we can model the Luxembourg ecosystem that will help you in getting more information, getting to know each other within the sectors, being able to exchange information and to perform a risk analysis. And the ideal goal would be that we can have an idea on the systemic risk analysis for Luxembourg and also for the different sectors. And we really want to encourage information exchange. But what also comes is that there are obligations for the instant notifications, as we already mentioned. And with CERIMA, we want to promote a national platform for instant notification, so that operators actually can use only one tool in order to notify, whether it is under CER, NIS2, or GDPR. So the goal would really be to have one single point of entry for instant notifications. With CERIMA, we are also giving the opportunity for exercises. So currently we are still in the part of where we do only tabletop exercises, but we want to implement it so that actually you could also individually do exercises on your own and check whether you have the adequate level of procedures, or maybe you're missing an important incident procedure that is not yet in place. As I mentioned, we in the previous for NIS1 as well as for telecom, we always did working groups. With NIS2, it is not possible to do it at the same scale as we did for NIS1, but we are still working, still want to have working groups, but it will be more probably combined, based on also some maybe pre-work from your side if you are an essential entity. What a working group actually helps you with is to get to know each other, building a trusted environment where you can exchange information and you are not feeling that you are showing your vulnerabilities, but that you're actually helping everyone if you're sharing your vulnerabilities maybe, or your instance that you were having, or maybe just a threat that you've seen. The idea behind all this is to establish the key values among the sectors and among the ecosystem. So information is key. If we are not sharing information, we cannot improve our maturity, we cannot increase our awareness, and we cannot increase our collaboration. So that are the key values that we really want to promote: information sharing, awareness raising, and collaboration. And in order to create the ecosystem in Luxembourg, to promote information exchange within and among the sectors, and to establish guidance where needed in collaboration with the entities. Currently, the obligations for operators of essential services is that, well, we have the notification of the security measures, which is defined in a regulation, where entities need to do a risk assessment based on the Monarch approach in CERIMA. Per sector, there is actually a deadline defined So for instance, the energy sector, the deadline is the 15th of October, but every sector gets its own deadline. The security objectives need to be given, so that's a list, an Excel file, which you can already find on the website of ILR under the security measures. So it's a list of 29 questions about your policies in place. And it does not mean that you have to have every policy in place already right from the start, but it gives you an idea on what to do next and where to set the priorities. And also, you can just say, no, I don't have it yet, or it's not applicable to me because whatever reason there is. And we can go through it together afterwards. What is very important to us is also to receive dependencies to other essential services or to other services in general, because that will help us identify if we have maybe missed one important player that we have not yet. Maybe it's a small entity, but it is a high risk profile, and maybe we missed it. So that would help us in understanding the whole sector and the dependencies and to get an idea on the systemic risk. So that are the three obligations currently under NIS1. What we do with that information is actually that once the operators of essential services submit the security report, so we're here in the blue, then ILR is reviewing the submissions and we are preparing recommendations. Based on the recommendations, ILR generates individual feedback reports. We prepare and organize a session with the whole sector, so with all the operators that in one sector, and we present the results. The results that we present here are, of course, not only like a benchmarking, so it's not like we present individual reports in that common meeting, but it's more like in order to give you an idea what the overall strengths and improvements in the sectors were over the last year. And then the ILR will send out individual reports to the C-level of the company. So that's how it's actually working currently. And we also plan on doing the same for NIS2. Perfect, let's move on. So what we do now for the incident notification. So we do have, and it was already discussed in one of the questions, for the incident notifications, the entities get per sector actually thresholds that are based on operational impact, but also on impact on availability, confidentiality, integrity of the data and networks. And then you need to notify if your thresholds have been met. You have to notify the incident. Currently, it's still this website, but in the near future, it will be through CIREMA. But so if you are already in one of the sectors under NIS1, you know that actually you already have the regulation in place for the significant incidents. They will all be updated. So it's really important to sign up for the newsletter of ILR because we will set up regulations with specific thresholds for all the sectors. Some may be combined, but we will definitely be publishing regulations for that. So now, as you have seen the current approach under NIS1, I would like to highlight what's going to be changing due to NIS2. So the risk assessment. The importance here is that actually with NIS1 and how it was transposed in Luxembourg is that the risk assessment only needed to be done on the essential service itself. So that was the obligation with NIS1. With NIS2, the obligation becomes entity-wide. So meaning it is the essential services, the services in general that are delivered or sold, but also the entity. So also the HR part, which is not directly involved in selling services or selling anything, but it is still part of the entity and needs to be assessed in the risk assessment. And CIREMA was currently for NIS1, it was built mostly for the essential services, but still it is possible, as it is based on Monarch, it is still possible to do it at the entity-wide. The security objectives. There will be a mapping between NIS2 and the security objectives. Mostly it seems still that the security objectives are up to date, but we need to be adding one or two questions. So like the C-level training, the internal audits, and the backup that are not precisely yet in those 29 lists, in the 29 questions. The dependencies, what we have experienced so far is that our template was not very fruitful because the answers we got were a little divergent, and it was not clear what our Excel or what our template actually in which way it was to be completed. So that's why we will be updating it, of course. You have to include the list of suppliers and to identify quality of products and the vulnerabilities. And the major part is that actually these, from starting with NIS2, a CEO approval needs to be integrated into the security measures for submitting it to ILR. So the timeline, as I said, so I didn't update the timeline because I wanted it to be the same input, same part that we were doing also for the previous information sessions. So we held in April, we held the NIS2 conference in The Hague. Next year, there's going to be a NIS2 conference again in Luxembourg that time. You will soon get information on that as well. So we are holding still NIS2 information sessions, and because we are repeating ourselves, that's why we are recording it today, so that actually we can have it kind of set up into the website, and so that people can see it more precisely, and we don't need to do the same information over and over again, and so that we could actually focus on more precise information and giving information sessions maybe on jurisdiction, on the risk assessment, and being more precise on different topics that will come up in the near future. We are working on the guidelines still. We have one guidelines, as I said, on security policies that it has been published, but we are still working on the guidelines for the risk assessment and the dependency templates. So we are a little delayed, but so I assume is also the NIS2 national transposition. And the member state has the obligation to have the NIS2 transposition by 17th of October. If we would consider that this is happening, and I believe that we will have delay, I don't know how much, but I don't think it will be happening on the 17th of October because we have not yet a formal opinion from the State Council. So I assume it will take a little longer. But when we have the transposition, ILR will be starting to update regulations. So if we have the transposition, then we can actually start in updating the regulations. So starting from as early as the transposition is there, ILR is going to produce new regulations, and we're going to do public consultations on this. So sign up for the newsletter because all the regulations will be up for public consultations, and usually that takes 1 month. So where you have time for 1 month to reply and give your feedback to the regulations, to the draft regulations, and we can incorporate your input and your contributions. And then we will have to do the regulations. So considering, let's say we will have 1st of November, we will have the national transposition. Then it will not be that we will have new regulations in place for the 1st of January, let's say, because we will still have to update regulations, and we have to do the public consultation, which takes a month, and then we have to produce the final version of the regulation, and then we have to publish the regulation. So that takes more than a month. With the public consultations. If one is really fast, we could do it, and if there's no feedback been given, then we could do it like within 6 weeks, the whole public consultation plus publication of the final regulations. So that would be really, really fast. So, but that's, I imagine that you will have a lot of feedback, so that will take a little time. So I don't think there will be new regulations before the 1st of January anyway, but we can calculate maybe like 2 months at least for new regulations when the transposition has been done. And keeping in mind that we will have to be doing regulations for all the sectors. So one of the sectors that is really important is, or one of the regulations is on the security measures, because the security measures, when we're going to define when and what you need to submit for essential entities, that's really important, because there you're also going to see the deadlines that we will impose on the new sectors. Then we also will do the regulations for the instant notifications, but here it's very important. So when we do have the security measures, it will only come into effect once the deadlines are done by us. So you will not have to send us any security measures in advance prior if we do not have the regulation in place. However, for the instant notification, very important point, for the instant notification, the obligation to notify an instance starts immediately when the transposition has been done. So when we will have the transposition, let's say 1st of November, then you have an instance the 2nd of November, then you have to notify this instance already, immediately, without the need of our regulation, because it is implemented, it is transposed. The only thing that our regulation will help is actually in identifying which incidents need to be notified. So we will help clarifying it with the regulations, but the obligation is already there once the transposition is done. And same goes for those who are under the main establishment jurisdiction. Once the implementing act is there, the obligation is already there. So I would really tell you to notify the instance from that moment on. Then the deadline for entities to register is from the directive itself is the 17th of January. So if we do not have a transposition until then ILR will be in trouble, because we will not have the legal obligation from a national point of view to get the self-registration, but we still need to give a list of essential and important entities to the European Commission, but only an anonymous list. So it's not going to be a full list with the name and addresses and contact information, but it will be a list of entity number 1 in that sector, entity number 2 of that sector, that we need to be doing until the 17th of April. So why I'm putting it here on the timeline is that even if the transposition is not yet in place, I really would recommend you to do the self-registration so that we can already build our list. Because especially also for those who are falling under the main establishment, you have to be on the list by 17th of April at least, and the others as well, because we need to communicate. So we are already working on our side as well to get more information of entities that are active in different sectors, and which is also very important here. So if you are active in one of the sectors, means that you are falling under NIS2. It does not mean that it is necessarily only your primary activity that is falling under NIS2. So if you are having a side activity of, I don't know, selling an energy, then you are still falling under NIS2, even if your main part would be, I don't know, selling t-shirts. So if your main part is selling t-shirts, but still you are doing energy on a side business and it is part of your business, then you still fall under NIS2. So it's not only your primary activity, but also the secondary activity that is falling under NIS2. I mean, I kind of said that we have a collaborative approach and we really want to help you. And that's why we are working on those information sessions. We are working with the different entities. So we are working with FEDIL, sometimes we come to the NIS2 forum. We will have a session with KPMG this week. We are working on guidelines and we really try to facilitate information exchange. And also with the platform for instant notifications, we are working for you to have it easier and not to be overflown with all the kind of obligations and where I need to notify what instant. So we are really working on it. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us at nis2@ilr.lu. Please sign up for the newsletter. And if you have questions on NIS2, send us an email at nis2@ilr.lu. And yes, thank you for being here. Thank you for being interested in NIS2. And I hope to see you in the future as well.